Fantastic. Can the drunkards at the table hear me? Fantastic. Hi everyone, thanks everyone for coming to, this is September's Nature on Tap Talk. Very excited today. Just like obviously as usual, the usual ground rules, or thank yous rather. First of all, thanks to Percy Giraffe for helping us set everything up. All the sound has been challenging, and all the tables and all the chairs and all of that, and actually letting us host these talks here. So big thank you to them. Big round of applause. Big round of applause for Painter Dog TV. Whoever doesn't see them, everyone just turn around and look at them there. Wave at them, wave at the camera. Give them a round of applause. Thanks guys, thanks for filming these. I really appreciate it. And then thanks to Scales. Big wave at Amy there, sitting there quietly on the radar. Amy helps us massively with all our kind of funding and stuff like that. So massive, massive thank you. So yeah, very excited this week. It's going to be a really, really good talk. I'm looking forward to it particularly. I'm not going to chew your ear off too much with too much talking. I'm going to hand over quite swiftly to Derek. Derek lives here in Rietspruit, and he's a fantastic speaker. I know this because as you can see on the screen here, he's got his own kind of YouTube channel actually, where he hosts talks like this about different kinds of things about birds. So I'm very excited to introduce Derek and to hear about some of his some fantastic research and general interest in birds and things like that. So without further ado, Derek, take us away.
Thank you. Bear with me for a second while I turn myself into Lady Gaga or somebody. Right, can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Just put this on my belt so it doesn't fall on the floor. Okay, that's interesting. Never done that before. Right, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about color as made, seen, and evolved in birds, and there's three words in there: made, seen, and evolved. So we're really going to be looking at how birds make color, how birds see color, and some of the reasons why particular color patterns and color styles evolved in birds. Now, before we get started, you probably all know that birds are living theropod dinosaurs, belong to the same group as our very good friend Tyrannosaurus rex. And my wife and I have been putting together some children's books. It's a bit of a hobby, but it also helps fund projects like Learn the Birds and gives us the ability to be able to continue to create nature content. And she's going to hand around a couple of the books. So the one that I think is relevant for this evening is called There's a Dinosaur in My Tree, and it will be available outside afterwards. So that's my promo for that. Now, you may wonder, who am I and why am I up here talking? And so I'll say a little bit about myself, as little as possible. My PhD's in marine biology, obviously, and I spent 18 years doing research based in Cape Town before getting involved in other things, university management primarily around technology, which was my hobby, and then eventually I became part of a group of technology startups, and so
Sorry, you muted the microphone for the...
Can I just check for a little?
You can.
Alright.
Is it okay?
Yeah. All good.
Can you hear down there?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it fell down. It's gone in my belly button somewhere. I got too many wires here. Okay, let that one go. I don't know where the microphone is. It's gone. Oh, it's on the floor. That's why you can't hear. So we'll put it back here, and hopefully that'll be okay. Right. Before I became a comedian, Yeah, so my hobby was technology when I was in biology, and now that I'm in technology, biology is my hobby. So I'm trying to bring my background in biology to bear on some of the things that interest me. My background is in systematics, phylogeny, and ecology, and I became interested in birds after I stopped being a professional biologist, and I've, like most people who get involved in birds, kind of been consumed by it since. And what I'm trying to do is to make birding and other engagements with nature more interesting by embedding in what people do some biological concepts. So when you see a bird and you see that it's red and that one is brown, you have an idea why is it like that. When you see birds flying and you see the underside of their wings and you notice that they're dark on the back, and why are they like that? What are the biological factors that created the kind of way in which organisms are, how they live and how they interact? And that's kind of what I think will make birding and other nature hobbies more interesting. Now, obviously, color is very important to us, right? We make extensive use of color, and if the world is in black and white, we don't notice it as much, and if we want to advertise something, we're going to put it out in color, not in black and white. And if you look at birds, color is obviously interesting and important to them as well, because if you look at, this is just almost a random selection of South African birds. Well, no, not all of them are South African. The pink one there is not, but most of them are. And you can see that color must mean something to them, because otherwise they wouldn't expend energy, metabolic energy, creating colors. So, and color isn't just about the colorful ones, the red ones, the yellow ones, the bright blue ones. A lot can be done with just shades of brown, black, and white. And so color is, is the whole gamut of things from black to white to red to yellow to, all of it. And then, so we're going to look at what is color, and then we're going to look at how birds make color. And then I think a really interesting thing is how birds see color, because it's not like we see color. And then what are the selection pressures that drive color in birds? And after that, I think you'll be ready for dinner. So first of all, what is color? Color is around us all the time. We're wearing shirts, we're wearing jeans, everybody's wearing clothes. They picked it for the color. But we don't often think about what color actually is. And essentially, color is nothing more than our visual perception of a small piece of the electromagnetic spectrum. And if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum from the low energy to the high energy, or the long wavelength to the short wavelengths, you'll see it goes from radio waves through microwaves to infrared to ultraviolet, through X-rays up to gamma rays in terms of the amount of energy that is contained. And somewhere in the middle there, you will see the little spectrum, and that's visible light. And so it's from the lower energy to the higher energy, or the longer wavelength to the shorter wavelength, and somewhere in there sits visible light. And if you look at the wavelengths, the images, the icons here try to show the size of the wavelength. So visible energy is sort of more or less in the range of microorganisms in terms of wavelength, compared to radio waves, which is like a city block in terms of the longest radio waves. So visible light is really just this little piece of the electromagnetic spectrum. There isn't anything special about it. But what is special about it is that our brain interprets it as color. And so when we see different wavelengths, we see different colors. Our brain interprets it as a different color. But literally it is just a different wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. And then if we look at birds, what is color? What what parts of the birds have color that we might be interested in. Obviously the feathers, the skin, the eyes, the beaks or the bills, and of course the eggs. All of those things can have color, and those colors have meaning. But we are going to look at the feathers only for today. Otherwise it would take too much time and you would be having breakfast instead of dinner. So how do birds make color? There's two ways that birds make color. They use pigments, just like paint or whatever. It's the same principle, same process. Or they use structural, anatomy of their structure of feathers to create the color. And so if you look at pigments, basically it's the chemistry of how light interacts with the molecules that we just happen to call pigments because they reflect light of a certain color. And so pigment-based coloration, there's melanins, which obviously we know because some of us have little bits of them, some of us have more. Carotenoids, that's what makes carrots orange. Pistacopholvins, which we'll learn about in a minute, and porphyrins, or porphyrins, and sphenescens, which you can probably guess is found in penguins. So those are the primary pigment groups that you find in birds. Melanins basically form tiny granules of color in the skin and in the feathers of birds. And they typically are dark, black, brown, reddish. They can even go to kind of beigey, yellowy kind of color. And they create color by the light that they reflect. So they produce colors, as I said, ranging from the dark black colors that you see in some birds to yellowish, beigey sort of colors. And interestingly, melanins also add strength to the feathers. So you often find that a lot of birds that are very active and fly very fast will have black wingtips. Strength where the feathers are strengthened by the melanin that's in the feathers. And obviously, we think that when we're talking about color, we really think about the other ways of making color and the other pigments. But melanin itself can create some amazing patterns, like in this great Argus pheasant, which is one of the two photos in this presentation that I didn't take. But just look at that pattern. That's all melanin. That's all melanin. And it's just done by depositing it in the feather in different ways to create these patterns. And it's an amazing feat of evolution. And look at the bird's head just in the middle there. And, he's displaying for a rather drab female who's going to choose him based on the color that's created just with melanin. So, yeah, it's got a lot of capability. It's not just solid brown or black. So carotenoids are interesting because they're produced by plants, not by the birds themselves. And so they're not manufactured by the birds. They are acquired instead when the bird eats either plant material or it eats something that ate the plant material and itself sequestered the carotenoids. And so if you see birds that are yellow or red or orange or anything like that, there's a very good chance that the color that they've got in them actually came from a plant, not from them making it themselves. And it's actually pretty easy to produce different colors, red, orange, and yellow from a base carotenoid, because it's a really, really tiny little chemical change that has to happen. And as an example here, we can make canthaxanthin, which is red, from beta-carotene, which is the primary color in a lot of plant material, by simply changing, adding a double-bonded oxygen molecule to the end of the carotene module onto that benzene ring on the end of it there, for those of you who know a bit of chemistry. And that makes it red, goes from yellow to red. And it's a very simple enzymatic reaction. And so the bird can produce different colors out of a base carotenoid that it is consumed from plants or from its animal food that it ate. And obviously carotenoids can also interact with other pigments like melanins, and you get different kinds of colors. So this is a scarlet tanager, and you can see that it's got like greenish colors, it's got yellowish colors, it's got bright yellow and sort of greeny yellow, and that's all because of the interaction between the carotenoid and the melanin pigments that give it. And you see the same thing in our weavers. A lot of our weavers, you know, like the lesser mask weaver that we have around here at the moment, the males are starting to get their summer colors, and the yellow is bumping up and so on. But if you look at their back, they've got this sort of greenish tint to them and grayish, and that's the interaction of carotenoids and melanin. And of course, you know, the flamingos are famous for their sequestration of carotenoids and the creation of this color, this bright orange color. And of course the black on the wing is melanin. And the lighter parts are just feathers with less melanin. And our Narina trogon from the waterfall trail, just not far from here, it has that beautiful red belly, which is also carotenoid pigment that has that double bonded oxygen on the end of the benzene ring. Right, so carotenoids also play a role in the immune system, and they act as an antioxidant, and we're going to be talking in a little bit about honest signaling. And when we talk about honest signaling, think about this and think about how the pigment might be an indicator that the bird is healthy and in good shape and fit. Right, pistacofulvins are not unlike carotenoids in some ways, and they're found in parrots, obviously. And it's the pigment that produces the yellow, orange, and red color in parrots. So if you see anything that belongs to the parrot family, and it is got that orangey, reddy, yellowy color, that's all going to be the pistacofulvins acting. And unlike the carotenoids, the parrots actually make the pistacofulvins. So they don't get it from the food they eat, they manufacture it. They have cells that are capable of doing it. And just like with carotenoids, small changes to the molecule can give you a different color completely. And I'm not going to go into the details of that because I'm pretty sure most people here are not chemists, and neither am I. But the red pistacofulvins also carry a bacterial resistance, and you may or may not know this, but a lot of birds' feathers are being constantly attacked by bacteria. So anything that slows down the growth of bacteria in the feathers is going to enhance the life of those feathers. Of course, birds do molt, and they get new feathers, and then they get attacked by bacteria again. But the pistacofulvins in parrots help them keep their feathers last longer. Then there's porphyrins or porphyrins, depending on whether you're British or American, I guess. And these are produced by modifying amino acids, the basic building blocks of proteins, and adding copper atoms to them. So you take an amino acid and you add a copper atom to it, and you end up with the porphyrin molecule. And these fluoresce bright red when exposed to ultraviolet light. At least that's how we see them. How birds see them, that might be another story, but that's for later. Each porphyrin has a different chemical structure, so it's not really possible for me to say this is a porphyrin molecule and you do this to it and that, and you'll make it this color or that color, because each one is radically different from the other. They are responsible for the bright green colors that you get in Turacos, and the bright red colors that you get in Turacos. So, and they actually can produce a complete range of colors, including pink, brown, red, and green. And they're found in owls, pigeons, and some of the Gallinaceae as well. And if you look at the purple-crested turaco, of which we have an abundance around Hoedspruit, you will see that there's the red in the wings. And, you know, I've been trying for years to get a picture of this bird with its wing open. Nope. Nope. I get its butt. I get the top of its head, but no, not with the wing open. So that's all you're going to see of the beautiful red color on the turaco wing, but that's made from these porphyrin pigments. Then there's sphenescence. Sphenescence are made in penguins, of course, the sphenaceae. These are relatively recently discovered pigments. I think they were only found in 2013. The structure of them has only been worked out quite recently. And so it's normally a bright orange pigment that kind of fades to yellow depending on concentration and interaction with other things in the feathers. And that's why some penguins have that yellow color. And it's synthesized by them. It's not from the food. And it's found in, obviously, the king penguin, the emperor penguin, and macaroni penguin that have that yellow to golden sort of orangey color. So pigment-based coloration, you know, this yellow to orange pigmentation has evolved a number of times. So it's an example of convergent evolution, right? Different ways of making the same thing, of achieving the same result. Right. So the other way is to make colors structurally. And structural coloration is created through modifying the way in which light interacts with the materials. So it's basically, you know, pigments is basically chemistry. Obviously, there's physics in there too, but structural coloration is primarily based on the physics of the materials. And there are two types of structural coloration. There is iridescent structural coloration, and there's non-iridescent structural coloration. I think we're all familiar with iridescent structural coloration because we have quite a lot of birds in South Africa that show that. You know, things like the glossy starlings and so on, all are based on iridescent structural coloration. So basically what happens, it's almost as if you create a whole bunch of different little prisms. And the light, because sunlight is directional, right? It's going to shine in from a particular direction. It's going to hit something in the structure, and it's going to be reflected back or refracted back, depending on the angle that it's striking at. And what you see also depends on the angle that you're looking at. So if you look at the arrows here, you'll see that you know, these arrows are going off in different directions. Depending on where you are looking from, you will see a different color. And that's why when you see these birds with iridescent color and they fly and they turn, it changes. It's like a different color. You know, this green sunbird flies in and turns, and then it suddenly looks blue or something, purple or something like that. So that's all got to do with the physics of the angle at which the light is being refracted. And then you've got also a keratin cortex, which is basically protein molecules that play a role in the refraction, but also act as a filter. So they absorb some of the light. So you see a different color being refracted or reflected out of the matrix that the light's coming into. And what's really interesting here as well is because this effect requires directional light, you don't see it very much on a cloudy day. Why is that? Because the light is not directional. It's coming from, you know, it's coming through the clouds. It's being refracted and diffused. And as it's diffused, it's coming from all directions. And so there is no, I look this way and I see something different from when I look that way. And that's why these birds are quite interesting. And what's also interesting about this is, you know, you'll look at a bird like this, the green wood hoopoe, and it looks all nice and green. And you look at the same feathers from a different angle, and you get a almost completely different color. So this is a beautiful example of that iridescent effect. And many blackbirds, like the common scimitar-bill, that we are used to seeing as blackbirds, also have a degree of iridescence in their feathers. And when you get them in really well oriented directional light, they actually take on this marvelous purpley blue color, and they just look like a completely different bird altogether. And then there's non-iridescent structural coloration, which is in effect, irrespective of what angle the light is coming in at, the refraction of it gives you the same angle, because there's beads in the structure of the feather, and these microscopic beads they cause the refraction angle to be the same irrespective of which way you look at it from, and that's interesting because these tiny little beads or air pockets, and these are in the barbs of the feather, right? So they're very, very tiny. These are not like footballs. They're very, very, very tiny, and so they produce a very specific iridescent color. And most blue in birds is from this effect. You pretty much don't get blue pigments in nature, and certainly not in birds. So if you see a blue bird, that blue is almost certainly coming from non-iridescent structural coloration. And what's interesting with this kind of coloration as well is when you look at the feather with the light being reflected off of the feather, it looks blue. But when you shine a light through the feather, it looks brown and black. Why is that? Because the underlying melanin granules are absorbing the light and only not allowing the blue color to pass through. And so most blue birds, they get their blue from this approach, not from pigments. Right. So that kind of and then of course the patterns that you see with iridescent colors are also impacted by different pigments and different approaches to doing color. So for example, if you look at the ear of the glossy starling here, you can see the ear coverts basically just have a lot of melanin in them, and so they don't refract the light in the same way that the rest of the feathers do. So there's a lot of interaction among all of these different approaches. And then parakeets is another really good example, because you have this green plumage in budgie birds, budgerigars, is a result of color mixing that happens inside this structure. So you have green structural color created by light reflecting and refracting at one angle, and then you have some yellow pigments that absorb some of that light that's being refracted, and so you get a completely different color from what you would expect just based on the refraction angle alone, and that's because of these additional structures within the feather. And of course, birds don't just use one method. They use, most birds use some or all of these. So if you look at the white-fronted beater, for example, you'll see the black stripe to the eyes is melanin. The white front that gives it its name is absence of pigment. There's carotenoid in the throat, and there's carotenoid and melanin in the belly color, giving it that orange, and there's non-iridescent structural blue in the vent area, and on the back you'll see iridescent structural color. So all of these things are acting together in the same individual bird. And feathers also often look different not to us because we can't see ultraviolet, but look different or have different properties, I should say, because it's really difficult to say they look different because looking is a function of the brain, right? But they have different properties in ultraviolet light, and we really don't know what that means in terms of how birds will see the feathers. So that's something we're going to look at in a minute. So we'll return to this idea when we get to looking at how birds see color, which we're going to do now. So how do birds see color? Well, you know, what is color? We got to go back to this and see that color is basically our brain's interpretation of particular wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. And how do vertebrates such as ourselves see color? Do we all see it the same way? We know that not all vertebrates see color the same way. Some vertebrates don't have the ability to see certain colors, for example, and they're more closely would be more like monochrome. But what happens? And how do we see color? How do humans see color? How do we see color? So we see color basically from dark red up to dark purple that we call violet. So beyond that dark purple is ultraviolet, which is just, you know, it's the thing that gives us sunburn, right, or a suntan if we so inclined. Me, I just get sunburn, but we don't see that. We can't see it. It's invisible to us. The only time we see it is when our skin changes color. But we see light because we see color because we see light primarily in red, green, and blue. And so this is a very simplified view, but our eyes have a peak in the red area of the spectrum, they have a peak in the green area of the spectrum, and they have a peak in the blue area of the spectrum. And of course, it's not separated like that, right? But we call this trichromatic vision because we see the cones in our eyes that detect light are able to see in these three areas of the spectrum, and you can see from the overlapping lines here that you know, it's not quite as separate as I presented it, but nevertheless it is trichromatic. Birds, on the other hand, see well into the ultraviolet part of the spectrum, well into it. And what does that mean? What does that mean to the bird? If you were a bird, how would you see color? How would I be looking at you here? What would I see? Would I see bright sparks, or would I, you know, how would it be? It's not the same the way we see color, for sure. Birds, because they see into the ultraviolet, are said to be tetrachromatic because they have another wavelength of light that their cones are sensitive to. And if you look at what that means for us, we see in these three colors, and the other colors are typically made up by mixing those in some way, and we're able to see all of these colors. But what if we lose one and we become dichromatic? What do we see? The beautiful red-headed weaver here would probably look something like that. You know, we're only seeing the green and the blue. We're not seeing the red at all. We might not even see the pattern, the difference between the belly and the breast and the belly of the bird. Might not even show up. We don't know. But that's what you get when you go from having, you know, 2 to 3. So if you look on the right here, that's 2. If you go to the third color, that's what you see. So now, what does that mean when you're tetrachromatic? You have this another whole color, and it's even impossible to represent it because we can't represent another color in this approach. You know, with the three circles. So, what would the bird look like? It certainly wouldn't look like that, for sure. You know, what would it look like? Would it look like that? Are we seeing the ultraviolet? Because color is perceptive and color is in the brain, we actually have no idea how the birds would see it. We know they can, And we can study that, but we don't know what it means. We don't know how they see it. We have no idea. But we do know that ultraviolet feathers play a role, and and this is the blue tit, and people have studied that, and the male and the male and female to us look. Sorry, let me go back. The male and the female to us look exactly like this bird, exactly the same color, but the female to the male has a highly ultraviolet reflective patch on their head, and males have no worries about accidentally doing the wrong thing. You know, they will see the female perfectly well in using the ultraviolet sensitivity that they have, but we don't know what they see. We just know that they see it. Right. So when you're out birding and you have this camouflage clothing on, you know, and you're creeping up on a bird, what do you think it sees? You know, maybe it sees that, you know, or maybe it sees that, you know. The thing is, we don't know because, you know, we don't know what they see. We just know that they see ultraviolet, and we can measure ultraviolet reflection off of clothing, for example, and we know that if you wash your camouflage shirt in fabric softener, it makes it very highly reflective of ultraviolet light. So chances are good that if you're going out birding and you're wearing a camouflage shirt that you washed and used the fabric softener on, the bird's going to see it really well. So you probably look more like me in the pinky white version there. Right. So now, having said all of that, what are the things that drive color evolution in birds? So let's look at that. So we're going to talk quickly through some key concepts. I know this is kind of getting a bit deep into biology here, but I'll try and keep it simple. And so obviously we need to understand a little bit about natural selection, what natural selection is. We need to understand a little bit about what selection pressure is. And then we're going to talk about signaling, animal signaling. And we'll talk a little bit about hiding, and we'll talk about sexual selection as well. And all of those things should make this story complete so that you understand not only how color is made, how the birds see it, but what it's used for. Right. So natural selection, I think, is commonly misunderstood. It's basically the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to some difference in their genetic makeup, right? The features of the animal that you see or that are able to interact with the environment, the phenotype, and these are genetically determined. And so natural selection means that there should be some variation in the underlying genetics that make up a particular feature, perhaps creating you know, a spot on the back of your head versus not creating a spot on the back of your head or something like that. And some variations serve better for survival and reproduction or reproduction. So those characteristics and the genetics that underlie them mean that the survival rate of the organisms carrying that particular trait are able to survive more and leave more offspring, and so that trait grows in the population. And that's essentially natural selection. So the genes that cause the variation increase in the population as a result of some benefit that arises. And these changes, that's the basis of evolution by natural selection. It's an extremely simple process. It's no different from if you were breeding pigeons or you're breeding dogs, and you pick certain ones to mate, you will get an increase in the traits associated with the genetics that underlie them. Right. So you know, here's an example. Perhaps you know, you have a population of organisms. There's these circles here, which are you know, they evolved a long time ago. Actually, they evolved recently on my computer screen, but so, you know, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line. The genetics of these lines are different. This line doesn't survive. These two lines survive better, but then this one starts to die off, and so the population becomes dominated by these darker circles. And the ones that are dying out, we say that that trait is selected against, right? And that's an important concept. And those that succeed, that trait is selected for. So now, how does that relate to color? Okay, we're going to come back. So let's look at selection pressure. Let's call this thing that we just described selection pressure. So basically, any factor that changes either reduces or increases the reproductive success of a organism carrying a particular character, that will either whether it's positive or negative, it will be exerting a selection pressure, and so natural selection acts on the phenotype, that is the characters that interact with the environment, but the genes that are responsible for that phenotype is what's actually selected and what's carried on to the next generation. And the selection of genes, or the selection against them that we described earlier, creates a selection pressure for or against those particular characteristics. And this is what survival of the fittest means. It has absolutely nothing to do with being fit. It has nothing to do with an individual having muscles and being able to run or any of that thing. It has to do with those characters that survive and increase in the population. And that's so selection pressure is basically, let's say that there's a change in the habitat that will create a selection pressure. It will create a selection pressure for those circles that are harder to see, because they'll survive more, and the gene for being harder to see will survive, and that gene happens to be having more gray pigment. The ones that are lacking in that gray pigment will eventually die out, and they're selected against. And the environmental factor that causes that is called selection pressure. Okay, having said that, now we can move on. So there are some selection pressures that drive color evolution in birds. One of them is holding territory. So birds that use color to hold territory are often bright red, often bright in color. The males are often bright in color, and colors are often red. Obviously, avoiding predation is important. So anything that makes an organism cryptic will be selected for in when the selection pressure is predation. Species recognition. I mean, we got to recognize each other, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't all be here. We wouldn't be all be in the same room if we couldn't recognize that we all belong to the same species, or we all have some things in common. And organisms are like that. They need to be able to recognize themselves, and so they often evolve distinct color patterns simply for the purpose of intraspecific recognition. So species recognition is a selection pressure that drives color evolution. And mate choice, that's another one that also drives the evolution of color. And this is probably the thing that drives strong differences in shape and color between males and females of a species. So these are just 4 examples of selection pressures that drive color evolution in birds. And so when you're looking at color evolution in birds, when you're looking at colors in birds, you see that they're the result of primarily these 4 selection pressures. There are others, but those are the primary 4 selection pressures that drive color evolution. So if you see a beautiful bird with pink colors and fancy thing, and the female is brown and boring looking, guess who made those colors? The male made them, of course, because they're in his body, but it's the female that chose the male with the colors that caused those colors to evolve. So she created the selection pressure that led to those color evolutions. So, yeah. Well, you know, we can laugh at these things, but we are the same, right? Many of the characteristics of male humans arose as a consequence of female choice. But that's another whole story. So let's come back to animal signals. So you know, when we talk about animal signals, we're not really talking about signaling in the sense of, you know, there's a signal from the cell phone or whatever. But it is a useful metaphor for what happens, and it helps us to understand how color evolution can work. So if you think about signaling, so you know, there's a structural or a behavioral characteristic that can be used by one animal to send a signal to another animal that can influence the behavior of that animal. And that is effectively what a signal is. But it's not conscious, it's not thought about, it's purely a consequence of these evolutionary processes that we just talked about. So you have a sender of the signal, you have the influence of the signal, and you have the recipient, and you have the response, and you have the consequence of that signal. And it's usually some aspect of the fitness that we just mentioned earlier, right? So, yeah, this is, as I said already, this is a useful metaphor, and it's almost like a message from one gene in one species to another gene in another species. It's like a gene-to-gene messaging in a way. So if we look at birds, what do birds use signals for? Or what kinds of things are signals in birds? Songs, obviously, is one. Calls. Color patterns, obviously, are strong signaling methods. And display patterns, you know, how the bird is, you know, using those colors and display. I mean, if you want to look at the, I'm just trying to think of a local bird that's really good at demonstrating those displays. That you can look at bishop birds. Robin chats, you know how they go with their tail up and their feathers out, and they really show off everything they've got. And so postural displays and color and calls slash songs all go together in the bird to create that signaling environment, but we're going to just look at colors. So in general, you would think the signals provide benefits in some way to both the sender and the receiver, but it's not always that way, right? You can think of signals as being honest. I'm fit, come mate with me and we'll have fit children, right? That would be an honest signal if it was true. Then at the other end of the spectrum is a deceptive signal, one where you are actually conveying information that is designed to deceive the receiver in some way, and usually those deceptions have a negative impact. And then in the middle between that is an aesthetic signal. That is a signal that really serves no purpose other than creating happiness. You know, it basically conveys no information, but it makes the female bird happy enough with the male that she will mate with him. And that's what it's all about, right? Because then the genetic basis of that color pattern or trait gets spread more within the population, and so the character grows. So this thing about honest signaling versus aesthetic signaling has been a long-standing controversy in biology. It dates back to Wallace and Darwin, the two people who first posted like they didn't post in those days, did they? They wrote papers. Wrote the first paper on evolution by natural selection, and Darwin firmly believed that you know, all of these color patterns and everything were a result of aesthetic signaling that had no purpose other than because the female liked the color, and because the female liked the color would, you know, the genes for the color would be selected for, and therefore would increase in the population, but they also carry the gene for the behavior, and so the behavior increases in the population, and so you almost get a runaway situation where the evolution of the male kind of goes wild. And this was and still is today a controversy in biology that stems from basically the cultural view of humans in the Victorian England, where this all was being described, where men couldn't believe that characteristics of them could be a result of a female's choice. Females don't have choice. That's the way the world was then, and that cultural disposition has remained in biology right until this very day. So it goes back to Darwin's idea of sexual selection. There's also color signaling for defense of territory. There's also colors for distraction, and I'm going to just show you a little example, local example of automimicry. And then there's aposematism, warning colors, which doesn't really happen very much in birds, but there was some papers published quite a while ago, which I'll just speak to, and maybe Kyle, you will tell me whether this is nonsense or not. Right. So the idea of color signals came from Charles Darwin, as I said, and was first published in his book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. Darwin identified two types of sexual selection, one being male contests, that is combat and displays and territorial defenses and all of those kinds of things, and mate choice, and almost always female choice. There's a few where the shoe is on the other foot, but for the majority of birds that display this pattern, it's female choice. And then the honest signaling versus aesthetic signaling, and I seem to be repeating myself here, but this goes back to that time in England when culture was different a little bit from what it is now. Now there's a book by Richard O. Prum, called The Evolution of Beauty, and I highly recommend this. Get it on Amazon, and it goes into all of this evolution of birds, the way in which the concept of beauty originated, and it even takes it up to humans and human behavior, and brings that in as well. It's a really interesting book. Right, so color signals are typically going to be some kind of a strongly patterned color. So like the male southern red bishop here in his breeding plumage, which they'll be coming into, probably already are where they occur. We don't get many of them around here. That bright color contrasts with the rather drab color of the female, and of course the male, he doesn't have that color in the non-breeding, outside the breeding season. So what is happening here? You have very, very strong sexual selection happening on the male, and so at the time when the female is making her choice of who to mate with, the male needs to have this red color. But at the same time, you have a natural selection acting on the female, because there isn't sexual selection happening on the female. The sexual selection all is the female imposing it on the male. Natural selection is keeping the female in a much more camouflaged pattern than what the male is. But because of this strong sexual selection, it's able to overcome that natural selection trend to keep the animal hidden, because if he stays hidden, he won't get a mate. And if he doesn't get a mate, then that trend, those genetics will disappear from the population. And so that's interesting. And then, of course, you get the seasonal balance, where when he doesn't need to be colored, you have that strong natural selection overriding the impact of sexual selection, and when the molt occurs, the bird molts back into a brown color and is much more camouflaged. So he's able to take advantage of both circumstances, right? Be brightly colored when you need to be, and be brown when you don't need to be. Color signals in the defense of territory is very poorly understood in birds. But basically it's where the bird displays to another male to hold territory, and the other males will go away because hopefully they see this bird. They know that they're not going to be able to compete. So, but there's actually, strangely enough, not a lot of research done on that. It's probably because it's hard to study. And then, yeah, let me go on. This one is an example of a deceitful signal. You may not think that the little pearl-spotted owlet that is reasonably common around here is going to be displaying deceitful signals. But have you ever looked at the back of its head? That's a deceitful signal. That's not its eyes, right? Those are feather patterns that are designed to deceive a potential predator, or the birds that are going to come mobbing it or whatever, to keep them away and reduce the negative impact of that. Then this is the one for Kyle. There's aposematism. Is when the signal is saying I'm poisonous, so don't eat me. So a lot of butterflies, for example, will have bright colors, and a lot of insects that are poisonous have bright colors. Marshall published this in 1902, and I haven't seen anything that has been done on it since. But his idea is that the white wings and the bright red colors of ground hornbills is a result of them tasting particularly nasty, and the association between tasting nasty and having the color enables more survival, right? So those traits increase in the population. And then, of course, there is hiding and blending in with the environment, and camouflage is one, and counter shading is the other. Camouflage, obviously, I think we all understand what camouflage is. Counter shading is when you're dark on the back and light on the belly, and birds flying over can't see you very well, and birds flying over look up and just see the white sky. There's been some really interesting work done on camouflage, and some of it coming out of Claire Spottiswoode and colleagues in the UK. Basically, they looked at 3 different species of birds, and they found that birds that rely on camouflage it relates to whether the bird runs away when it's disturbed, or whether it hunkers down and doesn't run away. And this is particularly the case when it's sitting on eggs, right? So if a bird is going to hunker down, it's going to choose a place to lay the eggs that are more closely similar to its feather patterns. And if it's a bird that runs away when it's disturbed, it's going to lay eggs that are more closely related to the place where in terms of color pattern, to the place where the eggs are laid. And not really have its own camouflage matched to the environment. So what it goes to show is that camouflage by itself needs to have some other behavioral traits that evolve along with it in order for the camouflage to work effectively, which is really quite interesting. So basically, behaviors have to co-evolve with camouflage for it to be effective. And behaviors can be subtle and not something that we even notice unless we spend a lot of time really watching individual birds and observing what they do. Okay, counter shading I've already mentioned. This is a little sparrowhawk outside my window in raptors, and you can see on the back it's got the dark shading, and on the belly it's got the light shading. So when it flies over, it's difficult to see from above and from below. So that's kind of hopefully a bit of a story about colors in birds, how they're made, how birds see color, and what are some of the factors that influence the formation of color in birds, and how those factors interact and create both combinations of traits that enable the bird to survive, find more mates, etc. So that's effectively what we've looked at, and that's the story. We've looked at color, how color is the brain's interpretation of the electromagnetic spectrum. We looked at chemistry and physics of how birds make color. We've looked at the biology of how birds see color and the impact that might exist of that additional chromatic set of cones. And we looked at some of the selection pressures that lead to the evolution of color in birds. And with that, I'll say thank you, and Esther here is going to have the books outside if anybody wants to have a look at them. And
first questions.
And then questions, yes, of course. Questions.
Just repeat the questions so that we can...
Okay, I'll try.
I have a question. Earlier on, when you were talking about the carotenoids in weaver birds, the males taking on the green and yellow, and the females stay brown. Do they eat differently, or do they have different metabolism that the males take on more of the carotenoids for the orange or for the green and yellowish color?
Okay, I'll try to summarize that. The question was the carotenoids that make a bird yellow, for example. With the weavers, the males become yellow, but the females don't become yellow. Do they have a separate diet, or is there something that goes on inside them? So yeah, that's a super question. I think the answer to that is likely to be it's got to do with activation of the gene. So both of them will probably have the gene for converting the carotenoid into the yellow pigment that they and depositing in the feathers, but it's not activated in the females. In the males, it's activated, and when the male molts at the end of summer and molts into the winter plumage, it's also not activated then. So the feathers come back in the male pretty much looking similar to what the feathers in the female look like. And it's most of these pigments are simple genes. It's a very simple. It's usually one enzyme that's involved. It's not really complicated stuff.
For colours that are made from the intake of foods, for example, when birds enhance their colours, certainly the males do in the springtime, to attract mates and defend territory and that kind of thing. Do the birds actually seek out different foods that will enhance those colours, or is it just an abundance of food at that time that they're able to take in that gives them that much sort of sharper colour?
So that's a really good question. I'm going to try and repeat it. For birds that use pigments from the food to enhance their colors, do they change their diet seasonally as they create their breeding plumage? And when they don't need to create their breeding plumage, do they have a different diet? And to be honest with you, I have no idea. However, that doesn't stop me from speculating, right? So we can go and test the hypothesis. So my guess would be that it's metabolic in the bird, and it's not necessarily something that is the bird knows and it understands that it must go find, certain food to eat, but rather that it has the seasonality triggers the gene. Having said that, one could speculate as well, as you did, that in spring, when it's rained and there's more insects around, there's more likely to be higher concentrations of carotenoids then. So it probably would be easier to make the bright colors at that time of the year than it would in the middle of winter, for example.
The bird's anatomy with the retina, do they have rods and cones or something different that they can see ultraviolet waves? And how has it been determined that they can see ultraviolet waves? How do we know?
So the question is, do birds have a similar eye anatomy to us? And do they have rods and cones? And sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
How do we know that they
Oh, how do we know? Yeah, and then how do we know that birds can see ultraviolet? So the birds do have a similar anatomy to the eye that we do, but some birds have a very different structure of the eye to facilitate being able to see prey from long distances away, particularly raptors and things like that. But rods and cones, yes, they do have, and so we have 3 types of cones, and birds have 4. And that 4th one is specialized to detecting ultraviolet light. How do we know? It's actually not difficult, because you can basically shine not a damaging level of ultraviolet light and look at the behavior of the organism. So if you laid out something on the table here, for example, and it was a whole lot of plastic burgers and one real burger. I'm thinking about my tummy now. And you shine the plastic ones were less reflective of UV, and you shine the UV light on it. I wouldn't be able to tell which one was which, right? But bird would. And so you can use little tricks like that to trick the bird into seeing and determining what the response is. For the blue tit with the ultraviolet on the top of the head, you could create ultraviolet. Sorry, let me try that again. You could create plastic models of the blue tit, and people can do that nowadays, right? Quite easily, and see the response of the male when you put something on the head that is UV reflective, or you picked up a dead female and you chop the top of the head and put, there are different ways biologists do some weird stuff, right? And yeah, I think that was your question. Yes, sir.
I know, because my brother used to breed budgerigars to show, that he used to feed them different things to enhance the colours. Don't ask me what he used to feed them, because I don't know. I know he used to breed to obviously get the different colours to start with, but then coming up to a show, he used to change the food, so the blues would become more blue, yellows would become more yellow. So obviously, if the birds can do that in the wild, to attract the mates going, look at me, I'm bluer, I'm yellower, then it's going to work, isn't it? I guess.
So I'll try to summarize that if I can. So his brother used to breed parakeets and would feed them certain food to enhance the colors when it was coming up to showtime. And if that happens under those circumstances, it should be possible for the bird to be able to do that naturally by seeking out those foods that give it. And it's certainly true. We have to think of behavior, though, as not being something that is planned, because those would be instinctual behaviors. So it would only be true if over time a genetic variation arose that led to that behavior, and it was selected for because by acting on that behavior, that bird was able to get more mates, or leave more offspring, or live longer and leave more offspring. That's another way to leave more offspring, right? Anything else? I think everybody wants to have dinner. Thank you.